All right. So today we're going to be diving into something I think everyone thinks about pretty often. Should I be eating meat?
Yeah, it's a question I get asked a lot these days.
Yeah.
And there's no easy answer.
Right.
There's a lot more nuance to it than just like, meat good or meat bad, as with most things in life.
Exactly. And that's what we're here to unpack.
Yeah.
We're going to be looking at the arguments for both sides.
Right.
We're going to look at how meat fits into history, different cultures,
Yeah.
and even the idea that maybe it's not meat itself, but the quality of the meat that matters.
The quality, yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah. So first things first, let's give meat a chance to defend itself.
Sure.
What is the case for meat? Why do we as humans crave it? Why has it been such a staple for so long?
Well, I think we've got to start with the obvious. And that's just that it's nutritionally a powerhouse, It's packed with protein. It's got all the essential amino acids, B vitamins, iron, zinc, all this stuff that our bodies need to function at a very basic level.
Yeah, it's like nature's multivitamin, but way more delicious.
Exactly.
And speaking of our basic functions, I remember reading about just how crucial meat was for early humans.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, meat was most likely a key factor in our evolution.
Right.
And especially when it comes to brain development. Early humans who ate meat, they had a definite advantage. And I think that's a legacy that we're still living with today.
So from like a biological standpoint, we've got a long history with meat.
Yeah.
But it's not just about biology.
Right.
Right. Meat has a huge cultural significance all across the globe.
Oh, you're absolutely right. Think about all the traditions that are centered around meat. The holidays, backyard barbecues, different religious ceremonies. Meat is front and center. It really brings people together.
It does.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've laid out the meat is good side. It's nutritious. It's historically significant. It's part of cultures all around the world. But now let's flip the script.
Okay.
What about the arguments against eating meat? What are the concerns that people have that we need to talk about?
Well, the big one that comes up all the time is animal welfare.
Right.
Factory farming practices are a big concern for a lot of people, and, rightfully so.
Yeah, it's hard to ignore the reality of how a lot of our meat is produced these days.
Yeah.
And then there's also the environmental impact.
Oh, that's a big one.
Yeah.
Yeah, meat production, especially when we talk about beef.
Right.
It has a massive environmental footprint.
Yeah.
We're talking greenhouse gases, land, use water consumption, all this stuff that contributes to climate change and resource depletion.
So our love of a good, juicy burger,
right?
It comes at a cost.
It does. It does.
And on top of all that, some of the research that you've given me actually suggests that there might be some health problems associated with eating too much meat.
Yeah, that's true. There are studies out there that suggest a connection between diets that are really high in red and processed meats and an increased risk for certain types of cancer and also heart disease.
Okay.
So that just adds another layer to this whole should we eat meat dilemma.
Yeah, it's definitely not a black and white issue.
Not at all.
But this is where it starts to get really interesting, is that historically speaking, our relationship with meat has had all these variations, and there are cultures who have thrived on diets that are almost entirely made up of meat.
Yeah.
So we mentioned the Inuit in the Arctic.
Yeah, the Inuit are a great example.
Their traditional diet is so high in meat and fat.
Yeah.
But they've adapted to that environment incredibly well.
It's incredible.
It really makes you wonder, are our bodies more adaptable than we think?
Yeah, and it also raises the question of, are we really meant to be eating meat in the first place?
Right.
But, before we jump to conclusions, I think it's important to remember that we're omnivores as a species.
Well,
Our teeth, our digestive systems, they're designed to handle both plants and meat.
so we're not really meant to be only eating meat, but we're also not strictly herbivores either.
Right, we're somewhere in between.
Yeah.
And I think, while the Inuit example is fascinating, it's really important to understand that in the context of their specific environment and their evolutionary history, it's not necessarily the perfect model for everyone.
Okay, so it's not about picking sides, team meat or team veggie.
Yeah.
It's about understanding all the nuances,
Right.
the benefits and the risks.
Exactly.
And that actually leads us to, I think, another really important point.
Okay.
The quality of the meat that we're eating. Does that actually make a difference in this whole debate?
It absolutely does. If you're going to eat meat, shouldn't you be focused on getting the best quality meat you can?
I see what you're saying. Yeah, we're talking grass-fed versus grain-fed.
Right.
Pasture-raised versus factory farm.
Exactly the way the animals are raised and what they eat, it has a huge impact on the nutritional value of that meat at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And, grass-fed pasture-raised meat that tends to be higher in things like those omega-3 fatty acids that we hear so much about,
Right.
which are anti-inflammatory and lower in omega-6s, which can actually be kind of pro-inflammatory when you eat too much of them.
So it's like choosing the good fats over the bad fats
Yeah, exactly.
when it comes to your meat.
Yeah, and then, grass-fed meat, it also often has higher levels of certain antioxidants and vitamins as well.
Okay.
So you're kind of getting a bonus
Right.
when you go with the grass-fed option.
But let's be real, grass-fed and pasture-raised, it often costs a lot more.
That's true, it does, but I really think it's an investment in your health.
Okay.
If you are choosing to eat meat, opt for the higher quality, it can really make a difference.
I like to think of it like going to the farmer's market and getting like a beautiful heirloom tomato
Yes.
versus like the bland.
The supermarket tomato.
Yeah.
Totally.
You're paying for the flavor.
Absolutely.
And you're paying for those extra nutrients.
You are. And just like with those tomatoes, I think there is a growing appreciation for the taste and quality of meat that comes from animals that are raised in more natural and humane ways.
Right. So it's all about knowing where your food comes from and making those conscious choices about what aligns with your personal values and your health goals.
Exactly. And it really all comes back to this bigger picture. It's not about demonizing meat or putting anyone on trial for their dietary choices.
Yeah.
It's really about, understanding the complexities that are at play here.
Right. And acknowledging that there are valid arguments
Totally.
on all sides of the equation.
Yes.
And making the most informed decision that you can
Absolutely.
based on the information that we have.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to kind of sum up this first part of our deep dive into meat.
Yeah.
We've looked at the arguments for and against meat consumption.
Mm-hmm.
We've acknowledged the cultural and historical significance of it. And we've touched on the importance of quality when it comes to the meat that we choose.
Yeah. But there's still so much more to unpack.
Oh, yeah, there is. And the next part, we're really going to delve into the specifics of some of the research that you've shared.
Right.
We'll look at those studies on meat and health in more detail. We'll explore some of the fascinating cultural variations that we've kind of touched on here.
Yeah.
And, maybe we'll even get a little controversial and dive into that environmental impact debate a little bit more.
I'm excited for that.
Welcome back to our deep dive into meat. Last time we were just starting to kind of explore those fascinating cultural differences.
Right.
And how meat is viewed and consumed around the world.
Yeah, we briefly touched on the Inuit up in the Arctic who have adapted to such a meat-heavy diet.
Right.
It really makes you realize just how varied human diets can be.
It's incredible, isn't it? I mean, think about the Maasai in East Africa.
Okay.
Their traditional diet includes meat, milk, and even blood.
Blood.
Yeah, which in their environment is a rich source of nutrients.
That's not something you see on menus too often.
Not so much, no.
But it just highlights how different cultures, they adapt to their surroundings and they use what they've got.
Exactly. It's all about utilizing those available resources. And then on the flip side, we have cultures where meat plays a much smaller role or is even completely absent.
Right.
I mean, think about India, for example. Vegetarianism is deeply ingrained in their cultural and religious practices.
Yeah, and their cuisine is such a testament to the diversity and deliciousness of plant-based eating.
Oh, yeah.
They've really mastered the art of combining all these plant-based foods to create complete proteins and get all the nutrients they need.
It shows that there are multiple pathways to having a healthy diet.
Right.
And it really challenges that notion that, meat is the only way to get certain nutrients.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got these cultural variations, and then we've got the research looking at the potential health impacts of meat. And that's where things get a little
more complicated.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So we touched on some of the studies linking high red and processed meat consumption to some health risks. Can we unpack that a little bit more? Like, what's the science behind those concerns?
Yeah, so one of the things that comes up a lot is the formation of harmful compounds when meat is cooked at really high temperatures.
Okay.
So think like grilling or frying those methods can produce substances that have been linked to an increased risk of cancer,
Okay.
particularly colorectal cancer.
So that perfectly seared steak might have a downside.
Potentially, yeah. And then there's the issue of saturated fat,
Right.
which red meat tends to be higher in, and that's been linked to an increased risk of heart disease.
So it sounds like how we cook our meat and the types of meat we choose both play a role.
Absolutely. And, it's not just about avoiding risks, but also, maximizing those potential benefits that we talked about.
Okay.
Meat is a great source of protein, B vitamins, iron, all that essential stuff. But how efficiently our bodies utilize those nutrients, that might actually depend on the quality of the meat we're eating.
Okay, so let's go back to the quality thing.
Yeah.
We were talking about grass-fed and pasture-raised meat as being potentially superior to conventional meat.
Right.
But is there evidence to support that? Is there research that actually shows that that's the case?
There's research showing that grass-fed beef, for example, tends to have a healthier fat profile.
Okay.
It's higher in those omega-3 fatty acids, which we've talked about being anti-inflammatory, and lower in the omega-6s, which can be pro-inflammatory when we eat too many of them.
So again, it's like choosing the good fats over the bad fats.
Exactly.
But with your meat choices.
Right. And grass-fed meat, it often boasts higher levels of certain antioxidants and vitamins as well.
Great.
So it's kind of like a nutrient bonus compared to conventionally raised meat.
But grass-fed pasture-raised, it often comes with a much higher price tag.
That's true, it does. But I really think of it as an investment in your health.
Okay.
If you're going to consume meat, opt for the higher quality.
Right.
It can make a real difference.
It's like choosing that beautiful heirloom tomato from the farmer's market
Yeah.
versus that bland.
Supermarket tomato?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and just like with those tomatoes, I think there's a growing appreciation these days for the taste and the quality of meat that comes from animals that are raised in those more natural and humane ways.
Right. So it comes back to knowing where your food comes from and making conscious choices
Right.
that align with your values and your health goals.
Absolutely. And I think this brings us back to the bigger picture.
Yeah.
It's not about demonizing meat or putting anyone's dietary choices on trial. It's about having this nuanced understanding of, all the complexities that are involved here.
Right. It's about acknowledging that there are valid arguments on all sides.
Totally.
And making the best decisions we can based on the information that we have available.
Yeah, exactly. We've looked at those cultural variations. We've delved into the nutritional science a bit.
Yep.
We've even touched on some of those ethical and environmental considerations, but there's still so much more to explore.
This is where I think things get really fascinating.
Okay.
The future of meat consumption.
Right.
What does that even look like?
Well, it's a really exciting time for food innovation.
Okay.
We're seeing this surge in alternative protein sources, things that could potentially reshape our relationship with meat entirely.
All right, so welcome back to our deep dive all about meat. We've tackled the pros, we've tackled the cons,
Yeah.
we've talked history, we've talked culture, we've talked the whole quality debate.
Yeah, it's been a journey.
It has been a journey, but now it's time to look ahead. What does the future of meat look like?
Well, it's definitely an exciting time when it comes to food innovation.
Yeah.
We're seeing this surge in what are called alternative protein sources,
Okay.
things that could potentially reshape our relationship with meat entirely.
Okay. I'm all ears. Tell me more about these alternatives.
That's right.
I mean, plant-based meat seems to be exploding in popularity right now.
It is.
It feels like every time I go to the grocery store, there's like 5 new brands and products.
It's true. It's true. It's really amazing how rapidly this space is evolving, Companies are using some really cutting-edge technology to create plant-based burgers, sausages, chicken nuggets, all this stuff that looks and tastes remarkably close to the real deal.
And it's getting better all the time.
Yeah.
I've tried some plant-based burgers recently, and I'm like, is this actually meat?
Right.
What is the secret sauce behind all of this? What are they putting in this stuff?
Well, I think the heavy hitters in the plant-based meat world are soy protein and pea protein.
Okay.
They're both complete proteins, which means they have all 9 essential amino acids that our bodies need.
So they're nutritionally similar to actual meat protein.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, and companies are finding these increasingly sophisticated ways to process those proteins,
Right.
to make them more meat-like in terms of the texture, the flavor. It's not just about veggie burgers anymore.
What are some other ingredients they use? Because I've seen things like mushrooms, I've seen jackfruit, I've even seen lentils.
Yeah, you're right. Mushrooms, for example, have that naturally kind of meaty texture.
Right.
Jackfruit can be shredded and seasoned to kind of resemble pulled pork.
Okay.
Lentils are a great source of protein and fiber.
It sounds like plant-based meat is going beyond just trying to perfectly mimic meat. It's also about using the qualities of all these other ingredients.
Exactly. And I think as technology advances, we can expect even more innovation in this space. Imagine like plant-based steaks that have that marbling and texture of a real steak.
That's mind-blowing.
Yeah.
But how does the nutritional value of plant-based meat really stack up against traditional meat?
That's a good question, and it really depends on the specific product you're looking at.
Okay.
Just because something's plant-based doesn't automatically mean it's healthier.
So we have to be really careful about reading labels.
Absolutely. Pay attention to the protein content, the fat content, sodium levels, fiber, all that good stuff. A lot of plant-based meats are actually fortified with essential vitamins and minerals, like B12 and iron, which can be harder to get on a strictly plant-based diet.
So there's trade-offs just like with any food choice.
Right.
Okay, let's move on to something else. I've been hearing a lot about lab-grown meat.
Yes.
This is supposed to be like another game changer in the future of meat.
It is lab-grown meat, also called cultured meat.
Okay.
It's essentially meat that's grown from animal cells in a lab setting.
Okay.
It sounds super futuristic, but the science is advancing really rapidly.
So no animals are harmed in this process.
That's the idea. Proponents of lab-grown meat see it as a much more ethical and sustainable way to produce meat.
Okay.
Less land, use less water consumption, potentially fewer greenhouse gas emissions.
It sounds too good to be true. What's the catch? What are the challenges?
Well, right now, a big one is cost. It's still quite expensive to produce.
Right.
But as with any new technology, the price is likely to come down as production scales up.
It's fascinating to think that maybe one day I'll be ordering like a lab-grown burger or steak
Yeah.
at a restaurant.
It's totally possible. And then there are even more intriguing protein sources on the horizon.
What?
Like insects.
Okay, so insects, that's one I'm still wrapping my head around.
I get it. It's definitely a cultural shift for a lot of us. But in many parts of the world, insects are already a staple food source.
Right.
And they're packed with protein and fiber and healthy fats. And they're incredibly sustainable to raise.
Maybe it's just about finding more palatable ways to eat them.
Right.
I've seen like cricket protein powders and things like that.
Exactly. I think it might start with incorporating them into more familiar foods,
Okay.
like snacks, protein bars, maybe even baked goods where that flavor isn't as pronounced.
It really is amazing to think about all the possibilities. It feels like the future of protein is wide open.
It is. We're witnessing this real paradigm shift in how we think about meat and protein in general. It's about finding ways to nourish ourselves and nourish our growing global population without completely depleting the planet's resources.
So to wrap things up, we've gone on this incredible journey.
Yeah.
We've explored the history and the science of meat,
Yeah.
the ethics, the environmental concerns.
Right.
And now we've got this glimpse into the future of protein.
It's been a pleasure diving deep into this with you.
Yeah, this has been great.
And I hope our listeners feel empowered to kind of continue exploring this topic and making those informed choices
Right.
that align with their values and their health goals.
So whether you're a meat lover, a vegetarian, or just somewhere in between, we encourage you to keep asking questions, stay curious, and be open to new possibilities, because the future of food is really in our hands and on our plates.
It is.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll catch you next time for another fascinating exploration.
See you then.